Hey, folks, from Glendon, Maryland, and Florida, Omaha, Nebraska, Colorado Springs, San Jose, Norton Shores, Michigan, Ridley Park, Pennsylvania, Cohutta, Georgia, um, Missouri, Roseland Park, Kansas, another Missouri. Okay, we hit two of the same state. To me, it's become sort of a game to see how far we go before we hit the same state twice. And now we have Powell, Wyoming checking in on Facebook. So it looks like both Facebook and YouTube and probably Substack are here. I don't get comments from Substack on this interface, so I don't know about that. Anyway, welcome aboard today. And I'm going to try to get to your questions in the scheme of talking more generally about some of the theories of American democracy. And I can't believe I just said that in such a way that probably all of you are like, whoop, it's 6 o'clock on a Thursday, better go make dinner. Where I wanted to go with that was I wanted to start with why a democracy needs at least two viable political parties. I probably won't go at deep length today into why the United States doesn't have a number of parties. That's sort of a big, that's not a rabbit hole. That's like a big gopher hole, right? So I'm not going to do that today, but I do want to point out why it's so important for a country to have two viable, at least two. I'm sorry, if I just keep saying two, that's because that's the way the framework, it really works in the United States. But I'm not trying to limit that. So please don't write hate mail about why don't I want more parties? I'm simply explaining the theory and the reality behind why you want two viable political parties. And by viable, I mean parties that can undertake the work of running the entire federal government, either by themselves or as some part of a coalition. That is, you might really like political parties that are really good in one area or another, but you might trust them, for example, to manage the environment, but you don't really trust them to manage transportation infrastructure or feeding people. They're to be a viable party that can take over the entire American system, you really need to be able to cover the different aspects of what the federal government handles. Now, the reason you need those things, first of all, is remember the idea of political parties is really radical. In a way, in Europe and in the systems from which the American system came, you were either in favor of the king or you lost your head, right? So this idea that you could have a viable, loyal opposition is fairly new. It really rises in the 1600s and into the 1700s. And, it's sort of new when the founders write the Declaration of Independence and the framers write the Constitution. And they're still playing with the idea of what it means to be a loyal opposition. But they come to understand that it's a really important piece of a democracy for a couple of reasons. First of all, because a viable political opposition provides oversight of the people in power. That is, people who are participating in a political system in which they really run everything tend to be really bad at overseeing corruption within their own ranks. And, you can think about states like Ohio right now, or Mississippi or Florida, where they have really been run by one political party. And as a result, they've had quite bad corruption in that party because people tend to look the other way, or in that state because people tend to look the other way when their friends are in power. So you want, as part of a viable democracy, to have two political parties, at least, so that you have oversight of each other. And that, your opponents are going to say things like, whoa, let's take a look at you spending money on this or on that, and having to make a case for that. So you want that oversight. You also want people to understand that if they don't like the people in power, they have a really good shot at getting their own people in power, so long as they get more people to vote for their people. And what that does is it keeps people invested in the political system. So if your people lost this round, but they might win next round, you're still going to be involved in the political system. And it also gives them a realistic expectation that if they don't like the way things are going, they can change them. Without that, the only way to change the political system is to attack it with arms or to create violence. And you don't want to have violence in a political system because people get hurt. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, but you kind of want to build a political system in which you can arrange for it to move through time without building violence into the system in order to change it. I'm trying to be careful with my words because there's a lot about monopolization of violence in political systems that is involved in the United States in different ways. That system of being able to change the system because you don't like the people in power, you simply vote in other people, is good for the people in that system. It's also really good for the leaders, because they can leave office by packing their suitcases and going home to, pet ducks or whatever it is they want to do. They don't have to worry about hanging on to power, and because if they lose power, they're going to lose their heads. So that idea of having a political system in which there are legitimate political parties that are vying for control of the system is really important to a democracy. Okay, so why did I set all this up right now when all your questions were about very different things than that? I did that because in the United States of America, we now have the Republican Party as it used to be no longer exists. And in its place, we have a political group that is not really a viable political party. That is, it is not acting for the good of the American people. And that's going to matter in what I'm going to tell you today, because if you keep that in the back of your minds, the idea that the United States used to have the Democrats and the Republicans, and you were one or you were the other, and you might be an independent or you might be a green or you might be, these other groups, you belonged to a political party or you adhered to a political party that was a realistic option for governing the country in the interests of the majority of the American people. And that set up some expectations for the way that parties treated each other. That is, when the one party took power or the other party took power, they tried to treat the other party under the rule of law, and they tried to treat that other party as if it could be in power again. And therefore, you wanted to treat it in such a way that you took it seriously and you worked with the people in that party. Now, keep that in the back of your minds, because now I want to go to the present. And I want to point out that the election of Peter Magyar or his party in Hungary with more than 2/3 majority of the parliament last Sunday on April 12th appears to have been a game changer in the United States, also for Hungary as well. Of course, I am not a specialist in Hungary, and I can tell you what I read about Hungary. But that is, sort of like me telling you about, I don't know, college wrestling. Like, I know it exists, I can read about it, but it's not a world in which I have ever had any experience, right? So I can't tell you what it really means to Hungarians. I mean, I can make guesses, but I can only tell you what I have read in English in sources that are available to me in the United States. But what Magyar did is he and his party got a supermajority, as I say, of the parliament. And as soon as that became clear, remember, Viktor Orban's party has been trying to keep the opposition from gaining any power. And they did so by locking up the media, for example. They controlled about 80% of the media. They never let Magyar appear on television. Nonetheless, he won to the degree he did without appearing on television. They gave, they put cronies in power. They took a lot of money away from people in Hungary, and they really tried to force through the concentration of wealth in that country. And they also forced through a number of laws. They changed the constitution. They forced through a number of laws that privileged white Christian males and discriminated against LGBTQ plus people and women and so on. But what Magyar appears to have done, and mind you, we're only a week into this, not even a week into this, is rather than taking office and basically saying, okay, now I'm in power and we're going to try and get some stuff done, and then maybe the other guys will get in power, he recognized that Viktor Orban's 16-year rule was an aberration for Hungarian democracy and has approached the Orban and his cronies in office as an illegitimate political party. So what he did is when he first appeared on television after having won such a demonstrably extreme victory, when he appeared on state television, the first thing he said to the state television was, "We're going to get rid of you because this is not real journalism. This is state journalism. And in a democracy, in our country, in a democracy, people need real journalism. So we're going to get rid of that." And then he said, "We're going to nationalize the assets that you just gave to business people and foundations during the Orban era." We know now that Orban's government was funding or at least according to Magyar, was funding the Conservative Political Action Conference, that big trend-setting conference among the American right wing. He also said that this foundation that ran a university that was very close to Orban and that became very close to the American Heritage Foundation, the people who wrote the Project 2025, which is patterned so closely on Hungary, that they had been given 10% of an oil company and a pharmaceutical company in order to keep them functioning. And he said, "We're taking that back." He also told the president, not that he will be prime minister, the president of Hungary, that he was not the president of the country in the eyes of the people, and he should resign, or if he didn't resign, that he would see to the passing of a law that would force him to resign. And he said, the Hungarian people consider you all a joke. You have been able to force us to to live under your rule. We just threw you off, and we're going to replace you with a legitimate political party in a democracy. People are looking at this as a political issue, and it certainly is, but it's also a structural and a theoretical issue. By saying that the people trying to destroy their government from within are not a legitimate political party, they are in effect a group trying to stage a coup. Magyar has said, "We're going to take this country back and we're going to undo what you have done." And it certainly appears as if those developments in Hungary have struck true fear into the heart of MAGA Republicans in the United States, who have patterned themselves on Viktor Orban's political party. So if that's the case, one of the things that the Biden-Harris administration did that I understand what he was doing, but turned out to be deeply problematic, was the determination to consider MAGA Republicans a legitimate political opposition. That, what Biden and Harris tried to do was to demonstrate that Democratic policies were better than Republican policies. And by every metric, they were. I mean, the economy boomed and people got lifted out of poverty, and we invested in alternative energy, and we pushed back against China in all sorts of different ways and so on. But that really got almost no press because the MAGA press, the MAGA media, just kept flooding the zone with things about how terrible Biden was, how corrupt he was, and so on, even though that was all, rhetoric and mythology. What Magyar is doing is he's saying to those people, "We're not going to allow it. We're not going to let you tear down this country from inside. And we have the numbers to do that and to take us back to where we were before you gained power 16 years ago." So if you think about the United States in this moment, and I feel like that was a really long backstory there, but for me anyway, the theoretical underpinnings of it really make you see the degree to which Magyar has has said this isn't a legitimate political party in a way that Biden did not. Biden kept sort of saying we can work with these guys in a way very much, by the way, like people did after the American Civil War. They didn't say the Confederates, Andrew Johnson didn't say the Confederates are illegitimate and they can't participate. He said, "Yeah, come on back." And I would maintain that's a lot of the reason we're in the trouble we're in today in the United States in 2026, which I think is the year we're in. Yes. is because of that, and because we didn't take seriously enough the attempt of a small group of people to destroy the country, either then or now. Remember in the American Civil War, the white South and the white slaveholding South the large slave owners in the American South was less than 1% of the U.S. population. I mean, that's not usually the way people think about it. And again, I'm sort of doing a broad brush argument here, but that isolation of that group of people would have meant a very different kind of country than the one that we built after the Civil War. And again, the isolation of MAGA Republicans and those who tried to destroy the country on January 6, 2021 would have meant a very different present than we have now. If you remember, we looked like we were going that direction immediately after January 6th. And then Kevin McCarthy, who was then Speaker of the House, went down to Mar-a-Lago and essentially kissed the ring. And the floodgates opened, and Trump and his people came back into the good graces of the body politic, which, to my mind, was a huge, huge error. And now we're at a place where Trump is the Department of Justice under Trump. Not only has Trump pardoned those people who attacked the U.S. Capitol and committed crimes, including crimes against police officers, violent crimes, he has also commuted the sentences of the ringleaders. And now the Department of Justice under Trump is trying to get rid of those convictions altogether, which is mind-blowing. Anyway, so where are we? With this example of Hungary setting a bar and the realization on the part of MAGA Republicans that their movement is not at all inevitable the way that they have believed it was, it feels very frantic to me in Washington. That is, it feels a lot like the MAGA Republicans are trying to grab as much as they possibly can now. Because right now, they have this example of Hungary in front of them. Trump is also falling apart. I mean, he's just falling apart. And they have to deal with him in some way when he's doing things like picking fights with the Pope and dressing as, showing this AI thing of himself as Jesus, which has infuriated a number of the MAGA Republicans. And you're seeing prices starting to rise. And we are just now seeing the last of the Iran war tankers coming into ports. So there's nothing coming behind them. So the prices haven't really hit yet. You're seeing Trump's job approval ratings plummet. They're watching all this, and I think trying to grab as much as they possibly can. So what does this mean? It means that Trump is once again threatening to fire Jerome Powell, Jay Powell, the head of Treasury, so he can get his own, so he can grab control over the financial systems in the country. And you're seeing a real attempt of the MAGA Republicans to try and force their will through the country. And one of the great examples of this is something that everybody asked about: the the joint resolution, the House resolution, the joint resolution out of the House, resolution 140 for the opening of, for the getting rid of public land order that created a moratorium on copper sulfide mining above the waters of the boundary waters, above the watershed of the boundary waters in Minnesota and Canada, passed today. And it passed by a vote of 49-50. And it's an interesting thing they chose to force through. And yes, you've asked if it can be challenged. It was, and it will be. I mean, it can be, and it will be. But what's interesting about doing that right now is that it really doesn't do anything for anybody in the United States. That is, it's a Chilean company. It does have a subsidiary in Minnesota, but it's not offering many jobs at all. It's going to take out this copper and almost certainly send it to China for smelting, and then it will go on the open market out of China. So it doesn't really, and then it stands the risk of polluting. not just stands the risk, environmentalists think it will pollute the boundary waters, which are such pristine waters you can drink out of them, like dipping a cup into it. And currently, the boundary waters already support 17,000 jobs. So you pollute the waters, you've lost those jobs, and you've lost what that does for the Minnesota economy. So it's very hard to see this vote as anything other than a way to sort of pat Trump on the back so he can hurt Minnesota some more, because he's determined to destroy Minnesota because it's the home of Tim Walz, the man who ran for vice president with presidential candidate Kamala Harris and who called Trump weird. So he's definitely going after Walz, but I think it's also an attempt to do something that Interior Secretary Doug Burgum articulated in his confirmation hearings, when he talked about the American public lands and the minerals under them as being on the asset list of the United States of America. That is, he actually said to the Senate, he said, everyone talks about our debts, because there are many people, including me, who think that wealthy people should pay more in taxes to deal with the fact that, most of our debt has been caused by tax cuts to really wealthy people. And he said, well, everyone talks about debts, but we don't talk about our assets. Our assets are the minerals and the public lands. We just got to put those on the market, and then we can take care of our debt. So what he was essentially saying was that really wealthy people and corporations don't have any intention of putting any money into the public coffers. They simply want to sell off the minerals and the public lands that belong to all of us. They are literally stealing from you and me so that they don't have to pay taxes, and they can do things like this deal. So it was a funny deal there, but it was, I think, symbolic of we're going to slash and grab everything that we possibly can. Now, that will be challenged, but they will start to mine as quickly as they possibly can. It's a very valuable load of copper that is that they're trying to go after. And just to be clear, the kind of mining that they want to do, or that they're planning to do above those boundary waters, is called sulfide mining. And it's different than you don't just go down and you grab a rock and you carry it up. They have to dig through rock that, when it is exposed to oxygen, oxidizes the minerals in it. The ore in it oxidizes in certain ways so that when water runs over it, it creates things like sulfuric acid. So if you know about the Butte, Montana Superfund site, I forget off the top of my head the name of it, I've been there. The water leached through the mines there in Butte and created this toxic waste site that is really eerie when you go see it, because the water is electric green. And it's very beautiful in a way. It's in a sort of a tan or orangish basin, the kind of way Montana looks. And there is nothing alive there. Nothing alive. There's no bugs, there's no birds, there's no nothing, because of this extraordinary toxic waste. And that kind of mining we do in the United States, but we tend to do it in places in the Southwest where there's not a lot of water, because it stops the runoff in a way that you're going to get in a place like Minnesota. So Minnesota has never had this kind of copper sulfide mining because of the dangers to Minnesota waters. So it's not, you see people saying, oh, we've had mining, why does everyone get upset about this? It's not the same kind of mining that Minnesota has had before. And they went ahead and did this nonetheless. So you can see these places where they're trying to grab stuff as fast as they can. But there's also, the more you see this, the more I think you also see the pushback against that coming from not only people in the United States, but people from around the world. So let's start here with the fact that the right-wing leader in Italy has recently split from Trump. She was one of his biggest supporters, Meloni, over the fact he presented himself as Jesus and has picked a fight with the Pope. She is now, moving away from him, but she's also doing that in part because you can tell that he is weakening and that he is weaker, not only because of his mental acuity issues, but also because of the war in Iran. So other things have happened though, too. So one of the big things that jumped out to me is that the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Public Investment Fund, which is one of the sovereign wealth funds of the Saudis, which is overseen by Mohammed bin Salman, often known as MBS, who's been a really tight ally of Donald Trump, has been hurting. He has invested in a ton of stuff over the past 10 years, and they've known they had to pull some stuff back. So last fall, I think it was, or maybe it was even earlier than that, he made a lot of promises to invest. I believe it was up to $1 trillion in the United States. There was a lot of hoopla around that from the Trump administration, and there were already signs that they were going to be pulling back on those investments. But yesterday, they released their new plans for the Sovereign Wealth Fund, and one of the things that is on the chopping block, at least today, is I guess it's called the LIV. It's the LIV golf system that the Saudis constructed with Donald Trump to play on Trump's courses here in the United States. It seemed basically a way to funnel money to Donald Trump. And it looks like they're going to axe that. Well, they wouldn't be doing that if that wouldn't be one of the things they were going to axe if it looked like he was becoming more powerful, right? It's a sign he's becoming less powerful. But you can see there's more ways in which the administration seems to be weakening. So today, there was a vote in the House on war powers, and that vote did in fact fail. It failed by the vote. There was one Democrat who switched sides, and that was Jared Golden of Maine. You asked me what to make of that, and all I will say is Golden's a bit of a cipher. He's up there in District 2. Seems a good guy, but nobody, he doesn't really communicate a lot with other members of the party, so they don't seem to know what he's doing, and there doesn't seem to be a lot of rhyme or reason to where he takes stands, although he is not running for re-election. So who knows? He's had a lot of hard times with verbal attacks on his family and so on. So he went ahead and voted for that. But while that is incredibly frustrating because Trump needs to be reined back in Iran, that only veiled by one vote, which is a big difference from where we were, on the 29th, for example, of February. So you can see that weakening happening in very obvious ways in things like votes, but there are other things that are happening as well. So we're starting to get more and more oversight. So first of all, there have been new and incredibly disturbing reports coming out of what are concentration camps, I cannot emphasize that enough, under the Trump administration that really seem to be extraordinary violations of civil rights and of human rights in the United States of America. And those stories are back in the news, and they're starting to get more traction, which they didn't for a while. Remember how upset I was that we weren't hearing about it. And I maintain when we do get the full scoop on those, Americans are all going to be horrified and say, we didn't know this was happening on our watch. But I promise you it is happening on our watch right now. And whatever you think is happening, it's at least that bad. So you're starting to hear more about that. But you're also starting to see real pushback at the state level. So the state of Maine recently voted to stop the construction of data centers in this state, and other states are following suit. They don't want these large data centers. That's a real slap in the face to the administration that has been pushing them. But you also saw things like today, Lina Khan and Lev Menard started a new antitrust center at Columbia Law School. And this is not just about this administration. This is about unraveling the entire neoliberal movement from the Reagan on. And that's one of those words people throw around. And let me be really clear. The neoliberal movement is sort of Reaganism. And what they meant is, I've talked a lot about how liberal meant the protection of the individual, and it meant the protection of the individual from a strong state until Theodore Roosevelt, when it became the idea that the big government had to protect individuals from industrialization and from pollution and so on. So the idea of liberalism got attached to a big state. Neoliberalism essentially just said, now we got to go back to that period before that. It was just a way to try and grab the word liberalism. Anyway, key to that was the idea that was promulgated, it was put forward first by Robert Bork, remember him, in the Department of Justice under Reagan, who took a look at antitrust laws, which had been around since 1890. That's when we first get the first antitrust law. And I'm going to do you a favor and not go into that story. Killing me though it is. But we've had them around since the 1890s. And the trick to our antitrust laws in the United States of America until the 1980s was they said that before two big companies can merge, the government needs to take a look at that and make sure it's good for the country. That makes sense, right? So we need to see if it's okay for labor, for workers. Is it going to hurt workers? Is it going to hurt consumers? Is it going to hurt the environment? Is it going to hurt, the communities? Is it going to hurt the way we want to live? That's the way we had always done antitrust. And Robert Bork came in and said, no. All we need to look at is whether it will lower prices in the short term. So long as it will lower prices and theoretically make these corporations more efficient and therefore lower prices, mergers can go forward. And so you had the growth of these extraordinary large organizations that, in fact, destroyed labor's wages and conditions and polluted the environment and, might have lowered prices initially, but then made them skyrocket later, or destroyed local communities the way Walmart did, and so on. Lina Khan, she's one of the people who interests me more than almost anybody else working in anywhere today, actually, because she's really smart. I've interviewed her before, and I've read a great deal of her stuff. And what she has said, interestingly enough, is she said we need to go back to that older version of antitrust, where we take a look, where we recognize that the period from Reagan on was an aberration. That was not what antitrust was set out to do. We got to actually say, does this help the consumer? Does this help labor? Is this good for the environment? Is this good for communities? We need to take a look at all of those things before we agree to mergers. Now, she went to work after the Biden administration, where she did all kinds of stuff, and again, that she got very little press for. After she was there, she now is working for Mayor Mamdani in New York City. And as I say, just today started, or maybe not today, I just read about it today, just started a new center at Columbia Law. Now, that's a good thing because they have really smart lawyers at Columbia Law to re-examine antitrust law and the way we do antitrust. That's a really big deal. And it's a really forward-looking big deal. And it kind of says, we're not going to negotiate with MAGA Republicans anymore. We're going to take back our country. But that's not the only place you're seeing this sort of institutional pushback that is outside of the normal ways we're doing business. So another one that is fascinating to me is that there is a Democratic-led corruption committee looking at corruption in the Trump administration out of the House, out of Democrats in the House, led by Joe Morelli. And I will plug this later, but I got an interview with him tomorrow at 11:30 because I'm really keen on hearing about this. They've been putting it together apparently for months now and thought this was a good time to announce it. But they literally are just gonna hold hearings and look at the corruption of the Trump administration, recognizing that the corruption of this administration is part and parcel of its destruction of democracy, not least because, as Vanessa Williamson was saying to us the other day, if Trump stops taxing rich people and just takes money on the side from them, we have no oversight, and we also have no way to no transparency to see who's paying him, where the money's going, and so on. And we know things like, for example, some of the money that he has raised for his library, for example, I believe it is, there was an organization that was collecting it. It disbanded. No one knows what happened to the money. We all have suspicions, but they're trying to trace things like that. So that's an official, but not, I mean, they've put together a new committee to sort of, the majority doesn't want it. So it's sort of an extra committee off on the side saying, we're over here and we're taking names, as it were. And you know what the rest of that sentence is. But I'm not done yet. You asked about this as well, and that is the 25th Amendment to the Constitution says that if a majority of the cabinet and the vice president agree that the president cannot fulfill his duties, cannot fulfill his duties, that they inform certain members of the government that he can't, and then it goes into this process of saying he can't be president anymore because he can't fulfill the duties of the presidency. The 25th Amendment, though, and I did this the other day, and there's shorts of it running around, the 25th Amendment says something else as well, though. It says not only that a majority, you can do this through a majority of the cabinet and the vice president, it says you can do it with a majority of a committee set up by Congress, a body to look into this set up by Congress. And the Democrats have introduced a bill to do that, to set up that committee. Now, the Republicans largely are not going to sign on to that for a number of different reasons. But what this is going to do is keep that in front of the public mind and say, we're watching you. Now, you also asked me about the International Criminal Court and whether any of these people could ever end up in front of the International Criminal Court. The United States is not a signatory to the treaty that created the International Criminal Court, in large part because we made the argument that we didn't need it, because we had a court system that was based in the rule of law in which nobody was above the law. Now, of course, the Trump v. United States decision of the Supreme Court of July 2024 says, in fact, one guy is above the law, and that's the President of the United States. So our argument for not being part of that is now moot, right? So, people could make an argument that we do, in fact, need to sign on to that. But before you think too much and worry too much about what's going to happen there, somebody asked me today about presidential pardons, said Trump's just going to pardon everybody. Again, that works in a system where you're considering that both parties are legitimate parties and you're working together to protect the country. What if the Democrats take power and say, we don't consider the MAGA people legitimate, so in fact, if the ICC is interested, maybe we could talk? I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that the movement of a party outside of legitimacy changes the game in the United States in a way that we've never really seen it happen before. And I'm not suggesting necessarily that it will happen here. I'm suggesting that the Hungarians have set a bar to show how that could happen. So you're seeing this increasing pushback of the non-MAGA Republicans, everybody else, against this group, which seems to recognize that it's in pretty deep trouble. So you're also, you've also seen the NAACP is suing Elon Musk over the Memphis data center, which is polluting so badly in Memphis. And you're also seeing the people in the Trump camp starting to freak out about what their future might look like. And what I mean by that is that Russell Vought of the Office of Management and Budget testified both yesterday and today, yesterday in front of the House, today in front of the Senate. And in those remarks, he denied that he had ever impounded any of the funds that Congress had appropriated, which is a real about face from the way he was talking last year. And it also flies in the face of a number of court decisions that said, oh, yes, you did. But you can see there is this sense of, maybe I can't act with the kind of impunity that I thought I could. And another place you're seeing this is with discussions after yesterday of taxation. I'm sorry, this should have come before him. I didn't have the right set of notes in front of me. Where you had in The Guardian yesterday an op-ed by a number of economists and Zoran Mamdani of New York City, where they simply said, come on, this is ridiculous. Rich people are paying less in 2026 in their taxes than they did in the 1950s. We need to fix this, and here's ways we can do it, and pointed out that countries around the world are pushing back on that neoliberalism of the 1980s. So I think there is this moment that we're in where the landscape is changing. And as that landscape changes, one of the things that you're going to see is people trying to decide where their bread is buttered. That is, who should they back? Where should they jump? And you can see, as I say, Meloni of Italy sort of saying, maybe not so much Trump. And even the Saudis being like, maybe we don't need to invest in golf to make that dude happy, because he's really screwing a lot of stuff up. And it is possible that you're going to see more of a distance between Trump and all but his most loyal supporters as he gets more and more erratic. As they do that, the pressure to get rid of MAGA and to regroup the rest of the country against MAGA, the way that Magyar's party, coalition really, it's not a party, joined together to oust Orban and his people. And as they do that, the potential for changing the United States future in really dramatic ways, not saying, oh, we got to make common cause, we got to figure out how we can get along, but simply saying, you are not legitimate. We are more than happy to work with a center-right party. And in fact, the center-left Democrats, they're not center-left now at all. They're basically a center or even a slightly center-right party, because everything has moved so far right. But we could really have a center-left party and a center-right party that really could legitimately work together to some sort of progress. But instead, right now, we've all moved so far right that we've got the MAGAs, who basically are an anti-democratic party now. And in terms of their fear that you see right now, you asked, I'm trying to get everything in here. You asked about Justice Clarence Thomas's speech the other day, in which he characterized progressivism as anti-American and said that, people like me have given up on the Declaration of Independence and the values that made America great and so on. And that you just have to recognize as a far right political statement that really is detached from reality, and a reflection, I think, of real fear that they really are going to lose power after being able to concentrate it so fully for so long, and certainly in this administration. So in this moment, the big story to me is, first of all, how incredibly unsettled things are, how much is happening so fast, and how it feels, again, that's really different than me being able to say, look, here's a document, which is what I always like to do, as if you can see building opposition to MAGA as if it is not a legitimate political party, which is fair, because they actually don't want to govern. They want to destroy the government. They actually take their pattern from Viktor Orban and his party. So the fact that the Hungarians have said, we're really over you guys, is a model for America. And it just feels, since that election, like you're starting to see that coalesce in the United States. Now, that doesn't mean the things are over at all. It's going to get worse before it gets better. Trump is sending more troops to the Middle East. We don't know what's happening over there. There's going to be, as I say, the slash and grab is only starting. There'll be all kinds of stuff happening. Trump is more unstable than ever, and so on. But what it does say is that as these organizations begin to coalesce, and as the pushback starts to coalesce, speak up, because you're seeing just how tight these votes are on things like the boundary waters, the vote still went the wrong way. But the more people hear about that and the more electeds see what people want and that they will not get reelected after a vote like that, the faster things will change. And that's not only at the national level, which is incredibly important, it's also at the state and the local level. One of the things that I know national politicians are looking at really closely is that Moms of Liberty candidates are losing for school board elections. And they're losing in huge numbers. Now, think back to just a few years ago when Moms for Liberty was on the headline news. They were going to change American education, and they were the ones who were going to purify society and all that. And now the majority got caught up and said, no, we actually don't want some Yahoo over there deciding what our kids can read and what our teachers can say in the classroom. And they're pushing back and they're reclaiming that space. And the more of that space that is reclaimed for community and for democratic values, the easier it will be to take back more and more of those spaces. So unsettled for sure, but keep speaking up because it's working. I mean, if you look at where the momentum it is definitely in the United States on those people who are trying to protect our democracy. And in that, I hope that we can give each other a little bit of grace. I don't know about you. I am tired beyond belief. I'm sleeping. It's not that. It's there's just so much that's been coming at us for so long. And, people get snappy, and to the degree that you can give people grace, go for it and try to bring a little bit of joy to this world in whatever it is that you do as well, because that matters too. And let's just keep on going. I will be back tomorrow, as I say, at 11:30 with Representative Morelli from New York, who is running this corruption committee. And then I believe Joanne and I are back on Saturday. And my team and I have something up our sleeves for you all. It's one of the reasons we're all tired. And I will let you in on that pretty soon. So thank you all for being here, and I will talk to you soon.